Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The Moore Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The Moore Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The comments and views expressed on The Moore Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The Moore Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now listening to the UK's only alternative late-night talk show, and I'm Kevin Moore. On today's show, I'm joined by Nigel Kerner and Dr. Andrew Silverman. Nigel Kerner is an author and freelance journalist. His fascination with the puzzling phenomena of UFOs resulted in his first book, The Song of the Greys, published in 1997. The serious work on the subject is now noted worldwide for its radical view on the phenomena. My second guest is Dr. Andrew Silverman, a medical doctor who has been interested from an early age in the nature of what we are as human beings and what our potential is. He's always been fascinated to know how the image on the Turin Shroud could have been formed, being mindful of the fact that it cannot be replicated with even 21st century technology. Today's show is with a focus on the Turin Shroud, so Nigel Kerner and Dr. Andrew Silverman, welcome to the show.
Well, we're very pleased to be with you after a long time. I think you were one of the first people we ever spoke to, and been in a long circuitous route around all kinds of interviews, quite a few actually, via coast to coast, and we've come now back to my old friend, Kevin Moore.
Our old friend. Well, thank you very much, and Andrew, welcome to the show as well.
Very good to be here, thank you.
Now, just tell me, how did you two come together to do the sort of interview that you're doing today?
Well, I first met Andrew when he was in his nappies, virtually 12 years old, and he walked through my front door of my house many, many years ago, and we've been friends ever since, of sorts. He kind of bifurcated into the medical world, and he's a GP, very illustrious GP, I might add, with experience in medical matters, and I wouldn't say biometrics yet, but he's going to be seconded into that, as we all are, I think. In my case, I kind of stayed more generalist, and our kind of friendship kind of went through all those years with all kinds of various snags. Usually they were female, but we've overcome them all now, and I've been married 45 years, and Andrew's just on his the fifth month or something, was it?
It's 4 years, I think.
No. So to be serious about this, we have a kind of liaison with many subjects, including philosophy and religion and science, and we tend to think outside the box. And I think, Kevin, it's proved to be wonderful that we can do that, because I think we get a better handle on what might be true in this chaotic universe, ameliorations and disbursements and all the rest of it. And we've come to some amazing conclusions which we'd love to share with you.
Okay, so the focus on tonight's show is going to be the Shroud of Turin, but I'll ask you first, Andrew. What got you interested what got you interested in the shroud to begin with?
Well, actually, I was just a teenager when I visited Nigel's place and saw he had a full-length picture of the Turin Shroud, and I found it fascinating and very curious to understand how the image got there. And it was actually also his place I saw a video for the first time of the program called the film called The Silent Witness, which was BAFTA award-winning documentary looking about looking into the subject of the Turin Shroud and how did the bloodstains and the image get on there. And there were several forensic people that were interviewed on that documentary, and they had all come to the conclusion that this was once the burial cloth of a man who had been tortured, whipped, and crucified, and uniquely had as part of his torture had a cap of thorns placed upon his head, which sort of obviously brings in the question of whether this was actually the historical Jesus of Nazareth, and there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it was. But regarding the image on there, there was also some very interesting ideas that really captured my thoughts about the possibility that the image may have been formed by a short, intense burst of radiant energy that came from the body of the man. And I was fascinated to understand how such a thing could happen. And in the decades since then, I've been doing a lot of research into that. And so that's one of the things I like to talk about.
Absolutely. And is that what are some of the unique features of the shroud then?
Well, it's unique in the image on it is unique, and also the forensic aspect of it is unique in that this is the only object that we know that shows the results of everything that happened in a torture and crucifixion that was uniquely, as I say, involved the cap of thorns in this particular individual, and the fact that it shows it in a way that's forensically and anatomically, the evidence is completely consistent with what we know now about anatomy, pathology, and so on. To say that there wasn't this knowledge of anatomy didn't exist back then, and even sort of hundreds of years ago, to be able to fake such a thing, if you like. And in fact, if you look at medieval artistic depictions of crucifixion and so on, they always show the nails going through the hands. And it was only relatively recently that it was discovered that it couldn't have gone through the hands because the strength of the flesh wouldn't have been sufficient to carry the weight of the body. It would have actually had to have been the wrists, and that's actually what we do see on the shroud. And it was only in the 20th century that archaeological finding of a skeletal remains of another individual who had been killed by crucifixion was found, that confirmed that the Roman practice of crucifixion did indeed involve piercing through the wrists, not through the hands. Now it's very much a unique phenomenon with regard to the image, because this is unlike any other. It's definitely completely unlike any artistic image that one has ever seen, because it's not composed of anything that's been added to the cloth. It's not made of paint. The image is only on the outermost surface fibrils, just 200 nanometers in thickness. That's 1/5000th of a millimeter in thickness, almost around the wavelength of light itself, and that's how thick the change in the color is. And it's not made from anything that's been added to the cloth, but rather a change in the chemical structure of the cellulose in the cloth, very similar to the change in structure that happens when you expose paper to sunlight and it turns a sort of sepia yellow color, and that's what appears to have happened on the shroud. So it's the fact that it's only on the outermost fibrils, that it's not made of anything that's been added to the cloth, and is similar to what you see from the effect of ultraviolet light. And also it's unique because it's actually, the image constitutes a perfect photographic negative. This was discovered around the turn of the 20th century, actually in 1898, when Secundo Pio was allowed to take a photograph of the shroud. And the story goes that he nearly dropped his photographic plate in shock when he saw that all those centuries people had assumed that it was just a faint impression of a man on the cloth. But when you look at a photographic negative of the image of the cloth, then you see a high resolution positive, because the image itself is a negative. Then the third unique characteristic of it was discovered in 1970s by Dr. John Jackson, using image intensifying technology that basically had been used to study X-rays and the like, to look at the intensity of an image and encode distance from it. And if you put an ordinary photograph in one of these devices, you see a random set of peaks and troughs that bear no relation to the actual relief impression of a human being, if it's a photograph of a human being. But if you take the Turin shroud image and you put that through the image intensifier, then it comes out in relief at you, and you can see the three-dimensional shape of the man front and back in front of you. And this is unique as far as we know. There's no other object that has this, and it's suggests to many people, when you put it all together, the distance encoding, the photographic negative properties, and the fact that it's only on the very superficial fibrils, it looks as though this dead body of the man who had been tortured and crucified had somehow momentarily shone, if you like. The radiant energy emanated from this body brighter than the sun for a few nanoseconds, and that's how the image got there. And of course the question that arises from that is, how does such a thing work? And since this is a unique phenomenon, as far as we know in human history, what does it have to tell us about humanity, about ourselves, about the individual who the shroud wrapped, and about the nature of matter and the nature of mind, and how the two might be related? So those are the things that I find most fascinating.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. And Nigel, I will come to you in just a few minutes. But also, where was the shroud discovered initially?
Well, of course, it's quite plausible that the shroud was initially discovered in a tomb in Jerusalem. But actually, if you follow the history back of the Turin shroud, we call it the Turin shroud now because it's kept in Turin. Before that, it was kept in France, and there's evidence that it came to France from Constantinople, and it had come to Constantinople from a place which is now known as Sanliurfa in Turkey, which was then called Edessa. And it seems to have got to. There's some evidence that it came to Edessa in the time of a king Abgar, who was there sort of around the 2,000 years ago. And there's a story that he sent a message to Jesus while he was still alive, saying that he had this illness that it couldn't be cured of at the time. And a reply came that Jesus was busy with what he was doing at the time, but he would send something to him at some point. And it seems that it's referred to in the historical text someone called Adai, who is thought by many to correspond to Thaddeus, that actually it seems to have brought the cloth to Abgar, and it was kept in Edessa and was actually secreted away in the.
Of course, Thaddeus was one of the apostles, Christ's apostles. You see, so I think that point must be made. So this Adai or Thaddeus had a direct connection between Jesus Christ and King Abgar. And of course, the liaison between Christ and this king was made in terms of, as Andrew says, this medical condition.
And Nigel, what has always been your fascination about the shroud as well?
Well, I mean, similarly, I was interested in all matters that interface science with religion and philosophy, and looking at the borders of things and looking at things from points of view that weren't in the box, so to speak. And one gets a far better view, I think, when one looks outside the strict science or norms of scientism, if we like to use that word, looking at things with pebble glasses in a straight line and just simply measuring things in that kind of 0-1 fashion, so to speak, and looking at a more rounded situation and how these things connect up. The problem, you see, with truth, as we derive it these days, is it's so departmentalized, Kevin, that there are experts in absolutely every tiny little department and pigeonhole. And very rarely does anyone pull the information out of these pigeonholes and reassemble them together and look at where the whole total, the grander picture, the grander scale of connection, when you connect up all the dots, lies. And when one does that, one begins to see with these detailed kind of investigations into point resources, if I might put it that way, you will then begin to see something absolutely marvelous come in front of you, rather like sitting on a single piece of a jigsaw puzzle and not knowing what jigsaw puzzleness means. And at the end of it all, of course, what the meaning of a jigsaw puzzle is the picture, the whole picture that is what you're after when you put all the pieces together. And I've been always fascinated at taking all these stages, putting them together, and having a look at what the whole thing means in terms of an existential base on which we can explain or look at the great questions that decide our own destinies and presence and whatever in the world today. And since science is so piecemeal at doing a thing like this, and our religion is being kind of obfuscated, I want to point out here, though, let me say this quite clearly, I am not a religious person. I underline that. I'm not a religious person. I do not believe in organized religion whatsoever of any kind. But I do believe in the authorships of these particularly beautiful philosophies that originated and have been so obfuscated, so changed, and so kind of hyped up in terms of individual conveniences of cultures and tribes and so on. And you can see from what goes on in the world today, sadly, that this parade of scoundrels who do this for their own behests or whatever it is, rule the roost, and millions die and children die, and we're having this terrible tragedy going on all over in different parts of the world today, as it's been going for 2,000 years. And I looked at this idea of this man, Jesus Christ, and what on earth he meant. Why did he come? Why did he say what he said? Why did he say what he said the way he said it? What is the context in which all this was done? Why would he go into Jerusalem and prophesy he was going to be crucified there? If he was a con man, that's the last place he would have gone. The con men would have run away at the gates of Jerusalem. He went in, suffered everything he prophesied would happen. Now, a man who would do that, to me, is far more likely to be telling the truth than a lie. So when I then looked at what his truths might be, away from the generalized thematics as we get from the Gospels or whatever, usually it's more to be found in the books and the records that are thrown away, and not the ones that I included, if you like, in the so-called spiel in order to confirm various dictums of various groups and various things they might call churches and so on. Incidentally, Kevin, it's an interesting thing, you know, that in the language that Jesus spoke with at the time of his ministry was Aramaic, and there is no word in Aramaic for the word church. You see, and yet there's a translation that on which, shall we say, the Roman Catholic Church prevails to this day, which says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, and I shall be with you until the consummation of..." Well, who put that in? Why was that written in? And I think that looking at all these different ways of saying these things by adding things to them, we may well have been sold a huge bill of goods which might, in the end, turn on its head the full existential story of our existence and our being. And of course, as you know, I'm regarded as someone who writes things about UFOs and so on. And I think I told you the story in my initial broadcast, how I came at that from a point of view of science and so forth. As I say, I'm a more generalist in this schematic, far more interested in human behavioral psychology than the nuts and bolts, as Andrew does, as a doctor, if you see what I'm trying to say, and the biochemical sides and details and so on. And when I looked at the UFO phenomenon, the biggest surprise that I had of all surprises was that it was nothing to do really in significance with these things that fly across the sky at 30,000 miles an hour and turn at right angles, seen by astronauts, seen by the most reputable people in the world and affirmed by pilots, over 10,000 pilot reports about things of a kind of technology that we don't have in the world today. When you look at this, you begin to ask the question, what on earth is going on here? There is a huge mystery, and the terrible thing about it all is it seems to be covered up by the mainstream. So I smelt a big rat, and that rat's been with me for 30-odd years, and I've been looking at this in conformism with Andrew's ideas on the Shroud and so on, and we have the most amazing story to tell. I've written 2 books already about that. The third one's just finished and is about to go to the publishers and so on. And this story needs to be told. I would much rather be a simple private man with my family, but once you discover these things, and anyone can do that, Kevin, any single human being can do that, as I did, from being a thorough skeptic about UFOs to being totally gobsmacked at the Pandora's box that I've opened and I'm looking at here. And of course, Andrew comes into that with a far more specific and detailed sense of a configuration of all of this, which can be written in this piece of cloth, 17 foot by, I think it's 4 foot, is it, Andrew?
14 by 3, but yeah.
Well, something like that. And on that, a man, dead body, lying on a shelf in Jerusalem somewhere, between the leaves, 2 linen leaves of this cloth, glowed brighter than the sun. The science today, the Italian scientists, nuclear scientists that actually have done the research on this, science research, no room for doubt, this is measured research, discovered that it would take 34,000 billion watts of energy to make an image like the Shroud. And now to see that was done by a medieval artist in the 14th century who was a painter or some, is just testing credibility much too much. Here is the most amazing thing, as Andrew said. How can a dead body shine brighter than the sun, so to speak, with the kind of brightness of a nuclear explosion between 2 sheets of linen and provide a perfect picture of a human being?
Fascinating what you had to say there, Nigel, and we'll get more into the spiritual rhetoric just later on in the show. Andrew, just very quickly as well, there has been atomic testing done on the cloth. Is the Shroud order then carbon dating sort of suggests as well?
Yes. Well, I would say so. I would say there is good evidence that it is older than that. In fact, I was a medical student at the time that the original Nature paper was published on the carbon dating. And even then, I back in '89, even then, I remember looking at the paper. And there's some tables of data in the corner where they discuss the error ranges of the different labs. And I remember remarking that it's very strange that even if you include the error amounts that the labs were quoting, that it seemed that the different bits of cloth that they had tested, even within this tiny 7 centimeter by 1 centimeter fragment that was given to them to date, it seemed that even within there they were coming out with different ages. there was different amounts of carbon-14 in there. Just for those listeners who aren't familiar with it, basically, if something is made from something that was once living tissue, such as linen, which is derived from a plant material, it starts off with a certain amount of carbon-14 within it, and as time goes by, the amount of carbon-14 becomes gradually less, and as it becomes less, you can measure how low it has become, and from that have a rough estimation of how old it is. Now, the first rule of carbon dating is that the sample that you're testing for the object that you're trying to date has to be representative of the whole sample. There's no point in testing it otherwise if it is from if it's not part of the same structure. Now, the part that they tested was from a corner of the cloth that had been the most handled and damaged. And even if you look at the old sort of paintings of the drawings of the cloth, you'll see them people showing it being held by its corners and where it become most tattered and so on. Now, there's a couple in the States called Sue Benford and Joe Marino who, on studying the shroud, they noticed that there were certain aspects of the corner of the cloth that appeared to them to be very different from the rest of the cloth. And now there was one of the original team who had done the research, part of what was known as the STURP team, Shroud of Turin Research Project, which was a group of scientists, a lot of them associated with NASA, and in this particular example, Raymond Rogers, who was based is a chemist from Los Alamos National Laboratory, is the same one that had 30 years earlier been instrumental in developing the atom bomb. He had been, after being part of the STURP team and having direct access to the cloth, he had come to the conclusion that he could see no way that this image could have been forged, that he didn't know how it could have been manufactured by a person to make it look like that, and couldn't explain how the image got there. But when the carbon dating came out and said, okay, they're estimating it that the age of the cloth between 1260 and 1390, he said, I still can't see how an artist could have done this or a forger could have done this, but I'm a scientist, this is what the science is saying, and so I'm going to accept that it's medieval. Now, Sue Benford and Joe Marino said to him, we've discovered that there's a technique that has been used in those times in the 16th century and still used to this day by the nuns in France, called the invisible reweaving technique, which is used to repair damaged pieces of cloth. And it looks to us as though the part that was carbon dated has been repaired, has been the subject of repair, has had extraneous material interposed upon it by that repair, which would, of course, if it had been done, would skew the carbon dating and make the cloth appear much younger than it was, because the cotton that was sewn into the linen would actually have been much more recent, would have been 16th century or something like that, and therefore the averaged out age, if you like, of all the fibres that were dated would have appeared to be much more recent than the original cloth. And when he first heard about this, he called them fringe researchers, and he was very angry that they were questioning the scientific data. And he said, well, I've got the materials in a conversation with Barry Schwartz, the founder of a very good website called Shroud.com. Raymond Rogers said, I've got the material that can prove these people wrong in 5 minutes, because I've got fragments that are from around the area of the carbon dating, also fragments from elsewhere on the cloth. So I'm going to test, I'm a chemist, I'm going to test them and see whether or not the carbon dating samples are representative of the rest of the cloth. And you know what? He said, I set out to prove them wrong. I've proved them right. And the last paper he published before he died, and I think it was around 2005 in a peer-reviewed journal called Thermochemica Acta, the last paper he published was saying and providing scientific evidence for the fact that the carbon dating was wrong, because it was the sample that was dated was not representative of the rest of the cloth and had probably been subject to a much more recent repair. So yes, without casting any aspersions on the carbon dating laboratories, I can say, yes, I do believe that the carbon dating was wrong. And even one of the people who was part of the original research team, called Christopher Ramsey, who's now actually the leader of the of the Oxford radiocarbon dating lab. He's still not convinced that the shroud is older than medieval, but he does admit that there is lots of evidence that does require us to have a rethink of all the evidence together, not just the carbon dating in isolation, because there is so much evidence that historically and looking at it forensically and so on that points to the cloth being so much older than the carbon dating suggests, that more research needs to be done to find the true date and the true history of this cloth.
It's really ironic, Kevin, that the particular sample was taken from a part of the cloth that was most handled and was a patchwork put in by nuns with this special technique. And that this particular spot, or these spots, were the things that were actually dated. And that the real meatus of the shroud, so to speak, the central linen disposition of it, was never really tested for carbon dating in terms of the verity, pointing to the age of the object, if you see what I'm trying to say. So it's very, very strange that there seems to be some kind of procrastination, because the first thing with the interest, this is the most researched piece of anything, in fact, in history, and that they will not now just give a small piece of where this should be taken from and redate this once and for all, to lay this canard, to see how old this object is.
A lot of us researchers have been lobbying the Vatican to get them to release, to allow further testing to be done, but they won't have it. Even there are bits of damaged, charred areas of carbon, basically, from underneath the patches that were sewn on after a fire. That would be ideal for carbon dating. But so far, we haven't met with any success in them allowing any further testing to be done.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, if I had to speculate, I personally, this is just my opinion, but I think that the church would prefer it to be ambiguous. If the shroud is shown to be authentic, and if Jesus or Yeshua or Isa, or whatever we call him, is shown to have been a real historical character who existed independently of the church and their machinations and their history and their power struggles and all the things that they've done, the Inquisition and all that actually we don't need a church. We don't need any intermediaries to try to understand this individual, that we can try to look at, take a fresh look at his life, what he did and what he stood for.
Well, there's another point to this too, and I have to mention this on the other side of the scale, and that's where Israel is concerned. Because if the shroud is genuine and this man is what he's purported to be, Israel shouldn't exist. Now, do you think that that's going to be allowed in this world today? No way. So there is another party here that might, rather like the Christians, on the side of the Jews too, you've got this huge unfolding of the truth being obfuscated for political reasons. And we, as a human family of people, as ordinary human beings, for whom this individual came and is supposed to have been and done what he did, he belongs to us, not to these organizations that, for whatever political or religious aegis, rule our lives and section them into situations where we cause so much grief and conflict. So you can look at it both sides of it. Now, Andrew, ironically, is of a Jewish background. Somebody threw some water on me when I was a baby and called me a Roman Catholic. Now, I've been fighting that all my life. I just simply want to be an individual straight down the middle who wants to know the truth of our existence, not based upon our tribes or our cultures or the places that we are supposed to slot into and belong that other people have given us. We surely need to be individuals. And if this fellow is true, I tell you, Kevin, and what he did was of absolute verity and value. Well, looking at what the church, the Christian church, has done through the centuries with its evil, and now what the Zionist Jews are doing in Israel, that is the biggest disgrace to befall human beings. And actually, they're bringing in now the Muslims too into this whole thing. So they're cartelizing, setting each other on fire with each other and within each group and so forth. So it's a very, very important thing that we decide on this single piece of cloth what in fact we as individual human beings might be capable of. Because you see, this man is supposed to have said, "Don't ye know ye are gods?" He was talking about each and every one of us and a principle that is within each of us that is so fantastic. And that then alludes to the part of where I come into all of this, the great battle of the whole universe, or the omniverse, you might call it, that which is natural against that which is synthetic. And then we can look at, the UFOs and the greys and whatever it is, based upon that final premise, that platform of what is this? What does it mean to be natural and derived into our human frame now from the beginning of the universe, which comes from a point to this present time? Can you imagine this? Put that together, and you've got a fantastic story that we have to explain, which none of the books seem to put together and explain to this point.
Absolutely. And just very quickly as well, Andrew, thank you for that, Nigel. Very quickly as well, who are the, I don't know if I've asked you this, but who are the custodians of the Shroud right now?
Well, you see, it used to be belonged to until the 1980s to the royal family of Italy, and then the Duke of Savoy bequeathed it to the Vatican effectively upon his death, and so it still resides in what used to be his sort of royal chapel, but within the cathedral of John the Baptist in Turin.
Okay, and the evidence just suggests that the body was in the air when the image was formed on the Shroud.
Yes, that's right. And this was, I must confess, this wasn't something that, although now having realised it, it's now obvious to me. But it only became apparent to me by attending a talk that was done by an excellent researcher by the name of Gilbert Lavoie in a Shroud conference that I went to, and he just pointed out the evidence. Hang on a minute. If you look at this image of the man, you would expect, if everyone assumes and just takes it for granted with based on assumption, that he must have been laid flat out on his back on the tomb at the time the image formed. But if he had been, you would expect to see flattening at the back of the body, on the soft parts of the body where it was compressed against a stone tomb. And you'd expect that the hair should be resting back against the tomb, splayed out as well. But what you actually see is that it's actually, there's no flattening at all, that you have rounding of the soft tissues, the buttocks and the calves and the back, and that the hair is actually hanging down on his shoulders, which would only be consistent with the fact that he had actually been upright at the time that the image formed. Now, you would think, oh, if he's upright, you'd think perhaps he's going to have been standing up. How would a dead body have been standing up anyway? But actually, if you look at the feet, the position and orientation of the ankles and the feet, they're at different levels from each other and pointing downwards. And it appears as though this body was actually, strange as it may sound, was actually suspended above the ground at the time that the image formed. Now, that may sound a bizarre thing to say, but it's interesting that the man of the Shroud appears to be linked so strongly as to be appear to be identical to the actual original historical Jesus of Nazareth himself, and that if you look at the stories of the, or at least anecdotal reports of what happened during his life, that there were times, for example, at one point he was said to have walked upon the water, at another point he was said to have risen above the ground, and at a point where he went with some people up a mountain with Peter, James and John, he was seen to shine momentarily, to shine brighter than the sun. Now, this scientific evidence that points to him having been upright and the burst of radiant energy from the body are things that have only become apparent using 20th century research. They're not obvious when you look at the cloth. In fact, until you see a photographic negative, you wouldn't know about the lack of flattening at the back. So for those who try to maintain that this is the work of a medieval forger, it's amazing that there all these detailed evidence is actually upon the cloth, that we can actually see that this happened. And I'm fascinated, and I've written some the papers that are on my website on lightoftheshroud.com, going into more details about how such a thing might have happened, because it's really fascinating to me, and I think opens up a new arena for understanding both of physics, of the physical universe, but also the nature of mind and the nature of humanity, what a human being is and what a human being is actually capable of.
And what a human being, I might add, has become, because one can talk in the most glorious ways about mind and thinking and thought and consciousness, and having the faintest idea what one is saying, because one can't prove an abstract, because these are abstracts. But Andrew's point about the hair standing straight down, if you look at the picture of the shroud, and the legs in different positions, implying that here was this incredible phenomenon taking place with what was a dead body actually proved, because blood and water exudations have come out and they were tested by forensic scientists and shown to be so. That's death. The man was dead. Jesus didn't go in that tomb or whatever he was alive. That's very important to establish.
The way that we know this for sure, and again, this is, as Dr. Lavoie pointed out, is that we know as doctors, as physicians and so on, that that wounds, particularly wounds of the scalp, which he had several of, if you've ever seen someone in a casualty department or emergency room who's had a lot of injury to the scalp, you see they get completely covered in blood. Now, the only reason why there's such a small amount of blood, relatively speaking, on the shroud is it logically follows that the man must have already been dead at the time that he was wrapped in the cloth, because otherwise he would still have been bleeding, you see, and the cloth would be absolutely saturated in blood. And actually, Dr. Lavoie showed that it would the only blood stains that would have transferred to the cloth would have been the blood that was shed within 90 minutes, a 90-minute window before the cloth wrapped the body.
Yes, and so therefore here is a dead collection of atoms, if you like, Kevin, lying flat on some sandstone slab in Jerusalem. And the fascinating thing is that before this 34,000 billion watts of light shone to perhaps account for the image of the shroud on the two layers of linen. Of course, it was wrapped up like a parcel, if you like, you know. And this body lying flat, dead, would have had to have moved into a vertical position. And that's the amazing thing. And then the light flashed to cause this incredible thing, this image on what we call the Shroud of Turin. Now, that is the most mind-boggling thing to try to understand, and that's what scientists are looking at now. And of course, that the solving of that situation is what Andrew was trying to allude to. What are we? Because Jesus said, "What I do, so will you do. All things shall be known." This great being somehow was so wise and so wonderful, and I think it's wonderful, I will say that, coming from not believing him or in him or any such people, because they've been used by so many frauds and charlatans through the centuries to praise the Lord and pass them the money, so to speak. I want to know how these things actually happen. Are they true? So I can tell my children as truly as possible what to look for and what to believe. And that's really my incentive in all of these things, is, are UFOs true? What are they there? Why are they hiding? If they can come here past the Einsteinian forbiddance of E = mc squared, which says that the closer you get to the speed of light, and you'd have to travel at least at the speed of light to cover some of these distances between planets, right? It's impossible. The closer you get to the speed of light, the more mass becomes infinite. And so what you're in is, it's impossible to do that. There's a hem. There is a forbiddance there. So how do these things come here? What are they? That they can do this? How can they bear the inertial forces that an ordinary body like ours, if we were pilots traveling at the kinds of speeds we see these things race across the sky, there would be some of them pilots test very highly qualified people in ballistics might say 30,000 miles per hour, some of these things. I mean, we'd be at taking those inertial forces in terms of gravity, and to make a right-hand turn, we'd be a stain inside the window of any ship we might be traveling in, if you see what I'm trying to say. No, impossible. So there must be some kind of configuration of matter such that it could withstand these huge forces. And that's why I say that whatever is in these things aren't biological. They may well be synthetic robots or roboids, if you see what I'm trying to say, capable of withstanding vast amounts of inertial force or whatever. And they'll come up with ideas that you can get an inertial cancellation and so on. Well, nobody's ever been able to even hint or show how this is possible, so that a biological entity wrapped within this kind of cloak can actually be protected from these inertial forces. These things, and they have been seen to be so, and from recovered artifacts from the crash sites of all these things in the Soviet Union and China and so on, these things are really synthetic, constructed, artificially intelligent machines. And that, I think, points to a whole story which actually and strangely and fascinatingly connects up with things like religious artifacts like the Shroud. And that's the kind of connection I make within the disposition of my ethos, my own ethos. And believe me, please don't take my word for it. If you really want the truth about this, every single one of you out there listening to this, go out and do the research yourselves, and you will be amazed at what you discover. Okay, can I crave your indulgence on this, Kevin, for a moment? There's another very interesting story that actually points to this business of this individual, Jeshua ben Joseph, which was his Hebrew name, by the way. And we Christianize him, and we Westernize him, and we whiten him on the Sistine Chapel window, touching the finger of God. You see what I'm trying? That his father was a white man with a white beard, and Adam touching his finger, and each culture makes him their own, so to speak. So we've got 10 trillion, perhaps, individualizations, natural individualizations out there in space, shall we say, in planets, and that these things will have their own version of a god or whatever, or a savior or whatever. So I quite simply say, look, let's look at this thing in as neutral and as objective a fashion as we can, and try and relate it to everywhere, where it all matters, to all living beings, all thinking beings who can work this thing out. Now, in Jerusalem, something incredible happened to actually perhaps affirm what I think is a connection between what these things I call the grey, these people call the greys, and these alien beings moving, these UFOs and so forth. In a section in the Christian ethos, they describe the devil as taking this individual, Jeshua ben Joseph, Jesus Christ, in other words, up. He take him, and I'll quote the actual thing from the King James, I think. The devil taketh him up to an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the cities of the world, and the glory of them. Now, I tell you, I've been to Jerusalem, and there ain't an exceedingly high place where you can see the cities of the world. There are just several hills surrounding Jerusalem. So where did this so-called devil take this individual? It would have to be to a place where he could see the cities of the world. Now, the interesting thing, Kevin, is if you look at a two-dimensional representation of the landmass of our planet and its complete setting, so to speak, in two dimensions, not a globe, but a flat thing, you will get, shall we say, Chamkatka in the Soviet Union on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you get Alaska, and all the land masses generally placed there. And right in the middle would be Jerusalem. It's very, very strange when you look at that. There it is. Now, the only way that you can see what might be termed the cities of the world is if you went high enough, straight up, probably miles up into space, so that you could see down on all that envisaged what then might have been the main cities of the world. So I believe that this so-called devil was in fact some kind of alien entity with a technology that actually took Jesus up to this place and showed him all of this and said, look, I own this planet. Who are you that you could, come and do these things? And I will give you all of this if you will subvert yourself, or in any way subjugate yourself, if you see what I mean. Subvert in the sense that you would corrupt yourself enough to follow this individual asking that question. And so he would say to him, if you fall down and worship me, and this individual, and Jesus's or Jeshua's response was, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, and thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. I believe in that statement he was telling this machine what a machine can never know, and that is that it was a machine. And in fact, that it, with all its power, through artificial intelligence and alien machine technology or whatever, was a little more significant perhaps than our vacuum cleaner.
Well, let me ask you then, sort of going on from there, I'll ask Andrew this as well. In your opinion, then, with the information and the co-sharing that we've done with Nigel, would you say that Jesus was all man, or was he, was he from this planet in a sense?
Well, that's the great, great question, is it not, Kevin? What was this wondrous being? And if he says that we all are like him, or have the capacity to be like him, what are we then, potentially? This is the glorious thing about the whole thing, you and me and everybody listening. There is a capacity within us that this man is pointing out, saying, yes, these machines will come. Yes, they will do this with their technology. Yes, you might be impressed by them. Yes, they might even take you over. But don't lose your naturalness. We all come from that tiny point. The universe burst open to this juncture, 13.7 billion years, right, since that beginning. Now, isn't that an amazing thing, that we come in a concatenate line? We come in a concatenate line from that point, that first burst of energy with the Big Bang, as I call it. We come through mum, dad, granddad, grandma, and so on, going back in a line all the way back to the beginning and so forth, in many millions, billions of years. We have that line joining us as a natural living entity. I think that consciousness, knowing, mindedness, all of that comes from that point and what was previous to that. And I believe that this man, Jesus, to answer your question, was in fact a representative of a state of being before that, that existentially covers an eternal scale of being. And that he was saying to us that if we let anything artificial, synthetic, interpose itself into our naturalness at all, in any significant way, we will lose our ability to be that again through the kinds of ways he pointed out. We have to actually practice with our mind and what we are to be able to gain. And that's where religion and science, I believe, interface in this fascinating situation between a Jesus-type being and what we are, and what maybe artificial, synthetic kinds of technological creations might be.
Yes, but could you go down the road that potentially, obviously with the with the shroud, and the mystery behind that, what caused those markings on the shroud, and all the wonderful things that Jesus was meant to have done. Do you think he was helped by another race from somewhere elsewhere, as in they chose him to they taught him things, they showed him a better way of being so that he could teach that on to the people?
In all my researches, I think that the one thing conclusion I've come to, and I really want to get this straight, one thing actually said, Jesus was not some kind of alien being equivalent to the alien entities that visit our planet. He was the opposite of them, the antithesis of them. In fact, they are what he was here for, to point out that we shouldn't become like this. We shouldn't develop technology into this situation where, as a machine, you don't even know your own entity, your own self, your own kind of situation. I believe that Christ was the antithesis of the Greys, and I believe that the provider of the antidote to their machinations with humanity. That is something that I've arrived at through long years of research, and something I was looking for an answer, all the way through. There's a very strange, obviously in doing the research, you have to look at all the old texts and so forth. And in one of them, there's a very fascinating description that might allude to this whole situation. In James, it says, there are numerous accounts, within these many texts of the Coptic Gnostic library, which obviously the Christians threw away, but the Coptics were learned people, and they kept far more the frames of reference clinically than the kind of, hit and miss news of the world type reportage that brings us the present Christian ethos, I believe. And the Coptic Gnostic library, in which Jesus carefully explains, right, this particular situation is explained to his apostles exactly how to deal with alien beings should they be faced with them. Most notably, these explanations in this text is that in the first apocalypse of James, as it is called, in inverted commas, in the Nag Hammadi Codex, and people can check this for themselves, in this text, Jesus explains to the apostle James how to cope with these beings who take away souls by theft. What better description of abduction, for instance, could there be than that? Jesus goes on to tell James in this. He also says, where will you go when you see them? You are to say to them, to the place from which I have come, there shall I return. I think is pointing there to the fact that Jesusnesses and us as human beings come from a different situation, basically, or a different beginning point than machines do. And, there are so many other things. Once you get that ethos in your head and look at it, then you find so many affirmations in the ancient texts that make a great deal more sense than would otherwise do if you didn't have this kind of insight.
But what if the soul of Jesus had come from... What if these beings recognized Jesus' soul as being one of their souls from a previous life, and they'd come to planet Earth after discovering him to train him in spiritual teachings to help to help give mankind a different way of interacting with each other and coming from spirituality in a sense. What if it wasn't? What if it wasn't so negative? What if it was for a positive reason? Seeing as you're saying that there was interactions between UFOs and Jesus.
I take your point, but let me tell you. Let me answer it in this way. We have something in this world called the second law of thermodynamics. This is the all-pervasive master law which says that everything rots with time. If you look at our world, our physical world, it's rotting. Everything goes one way, Kevin. We rot the moment we are conceived. There is nothing that goes the other way. It's all one way. Now, there's something wrong here, because in every existential modus operandi, you always have a duality. You have an up, you have a down. You have a left, you have a right. You have opposed mechanism that actually balances things out. But in the overall drift of our universe, it goes just one way. And I am saying that if can we say a civilization lasts, it's far more likely to decay and get worse than it is to get better. So the older the civilization, now we've got it into technology now from, so-called primitiveness in the past. Well, I'm telling you, the same thing would prevail in any planet, in any type of being, natural being out there. So they are much more likely to be worse the longer the civilization is than the shorter it is. For instance, our civilization is just about 200 years old in industrial terms. I mean, imagine a civilization that's 1,000 years. They would develop technology. But my point is that technology leads us away from a natural power in us to resist this entropy, the second law of thermodynamics that rots everything. Scientists say the universe is going to end in a blank wall of nothingness at minus 273 degrees centigrade sometime. Everything gone, all atoms unraveled, all atomic particles, whatever, basic particles gone into nothing. Why is this possible when we can know all of this? In the stage going to nothingness. Why is it all so purposeless? Everything, obviously, we're talking because things have to make sense, have to have meaning. So if they are benevolent, these wonderful beings that come here, and we see them, and it's very easy to assume, wow, look at their technology. My goodness me, if we can get there, they can help us. Are they helping us, Kevin? They are hiding. If they are benevolent, would they not have come and opened up their hearts and taken every single human being and given us free energy and all the rest of it? Oh no. Why are they hiding? All the procedures carried out by them involve an element of force from the point of kidnap, these abductions onwards. Many abductees have commented on the blank, emotionless faces of these entities that take them. It all, for me, that's one huge rat I smell there. There's something here, some hidden agenda against the good auspices of our natural being, that these things who come here, probably developed by some advanced civilization and sent out like we send robots out to look at asteroids and so on, and that these things are machines, do not understand the natural connection we have going back in livingness, in being, living beingness. And of course they come here and then they think, well, what are these kinds of creatures? In fact, they are looking, I believe, to interpose themselves on us. And that's the big secret they're hiding from us. And how would they do this? Would they take us, me, you and I, away from us, of knowing us? Is there some way they might impose on our mindedness with their machine, artificial, intelligent mindedness, so that they then can become, in a sense, occupiers of us? Now, that's something we ought to consider. It may not be true. I am asking people, look at the logic of it and see what you think for yourselves.
So okay, I mean, Andrew, I'm going to come back to you as well. But why was the interaction then between this advanced civilization potentially and the Christ figure, in your opinion? Then, what I mean, if Christ rose and the shroud form, happened as well, and obviously, are you saying this was by the mind of a dead person, or this was in interaction with ETs in a sense?
I am saying that there's something about our mindedness, our consciousness, our thinkability, and Andrew would like to talk about this, and I think that's really the whole point, that is so wondrous and powerful that it doesn't belong to machine-mindedness. It is something that can take the whole conveyance of our being and restature it and remake it if we know how to do this. And the modus operandi Jesus was pointing out was a thing he called love. Now, that sounds really wishy-washy, doesn't it, really?
Actually, if I could just come in here, this is from many years ago. This is something that Nigel said that really caught my attention when he was saying, how do you define this thing that people called love? And his way of defining it was, the cherishment of that which is not of atoms for the achievement of a state beyond atoms. And I think that sums it up very well. For me, that sums up what Jesus was talking about. Jesus actually alluded 2,000 years ago to the second law of thermodynamics, way before Ludwig Boltzmann discovered it, when he spoke about moths and rust. And very interestingly, he spoke about thieves, which people don't tend to look at that, what he meant by thieves. But he spoke about this universe as a universe where everything breaks down. But he said there's another way of existing where there are no moths and no rust and no thieves. So I think we're sort of missing the point if we try to understand Jesus from the context of material civilizations or historical alien species that might be like him. I think to be like him, to be most like him, would mean not to need a body, not to be atomic. The fact that he may have come back into physical life if there was such a thing as a resurrection, and the Shroud image does raise that possibility that it might have been an actual historical event. Even that isn't really the point about a body living or not. His point, I believe, was about the continuance of your being, not the continuance of your body. And technology is all about the continuance of the physical, and you get all this madness spoken about, the transhumanism and people seeking to upload their identity into machines. And in fact, in Cambridge University, you can look it up on the internet, the CSER, Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. There's a group of very eminent academics, and there's a parallel one in Oxford as well, that are investigating what might be the risks to the continuing survival of our species. And the conclusions that they've come to is, of course, yes, we might blow ourselves up. We've come close to it several times over the past few decades. Yes, we might destroy ourselves through environmental catastrophes and whatever. But something that we need to really take seriously is the possibility that the products and fruits of our technology itself might be our undoing. And because people have lost sight of what humanity is, they've lost sight of what it means to think and to feel and to care. And a machine can't do any of those things, whatever the AI people say. All it does is processes information just like a calculator. When you lose sight of those things and their value, their meaning, and where they come from, then you can follow this madness. It makes you think that the way to continue your survival is to find some piece of software that is you. It will never be you.
What I'm trying to get down to as well is what is the connection, Nigel, between the UFOs and the Christ figure? And we're not really answering that.
Well, I mean, I was trying to say that the whole what the Christ figure and his entire thing, his entire kind of ethos and action while he was alive, was to point out that naturalness has to be the primary existential modus operandi and not artificialness, and that if ever we begin to start putting in artificial, non-living, non-derivationally living mechanisms within us, we will lose that ability of an eternal scale of existence beyond death. And that's the big deal, that we do survive death, that there is something that actually goes on past the so-called physical modus operandi, which lasts maybe 3 or 4 score years and 10 now, and that this absolute mechanism codes all our information into a kind of disposition that survives, and I call that a soul. That line of information that begins with the Big Bang and ends with you and me. That line of information, I believe, is called a soul. Now, let me give you
Well, hang on. You're still going on way too long. Okay, so you would believe in the soul then? Hang on. That we are a soul in a body. We come from, call it a place called home. Some call it heaven, whatever suits you. That the soul comes here to have experience. Would you agree with that?
Now, I believe that what came through with the universe, with every single part of that universe, is in fact that mechanism that we might call a soul. It's an information field, if you see what I mean, that is unique to each one of us, has our own kind of information field, which I would call, a, for want of a better word, a soul. Now, let me give you a small illustration of how this might be seen, Kevin. You have your mobile phone. Everybody has mobile phones these days. You look at your mobile phone and you have a text window there, and you make a unique message, say to your wife across the world 10,000 miles away. You type in saying you will meet her somewhere, blah, 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 at such and such a time at an airport, whatever. Now, that message you put in that window is unique to you. And technology does that. You press the button, you see nothing go from that mobile phone, but at the speed of light, that thing goes through mountains, hill and dale and oceans, whatever, and is on her mobile phone in a relative instant at the speed of light. Nothing is seen to go, but an information field that is unique moves from that mobile phone to your wife's mobile phone. Now, to me, a soul is, if you like, an individualized, far more information than a text message, with imagination, feelings, everything you ever experienced coded within the frame, your bioelectric field of your body. And when you die, that information field still survives and carries on. And now that would, to me, explain things. I mean, I had no idea of things called reincarnation and so on. But reading the ancient texts to write my books, I find that the Hindus and the Buddhists and various other, in fact, everybody once upon a time, including Christianity, believed in reincarnation. And I believe that this field then disposes itself on an eternal scale and finds a housing to carry on, if you like, an experience. But within that information field is also coded how you might want to reverse being an information field and go back to the origins of that field that began with the universe. And what Jesus is telling us is that the eternal scale of existence is before the universe started. Another world, you might call that heaven or whatever you like. But he was telling us that there is such a place. He said to the thief on the cross, for instance, I say to you, this day you will be with me in paradise. Now, if that isn't alluding to some other scale of existence, I don't know what is. And so the dangerous thing, Kevin, is you can hack into that text message of the phone. Now, what if a highly advanced civilization, synthetic civilization, can hack into our individualized information fields we call a soul and put their mindedness into it? They will then neither be them nor we will neither be us, if you see what I mean. And we are in a no man's land of nowhereness. And that, I think, is the greatest danger of all. And I think that's what Jesus came to warn us about. Resist that ever happening to you, because you have to still be your uniqueness, natural uniqueness, if you want to regain the situation that brought you here in the first place, whatever that might have been. And the fascinating thing is, how did that universe happen? How did this great Big Bang happen? How did we come to be here away from what was before the universe? And that's really the big question that we all have to seek. Why did these great teachers allude to something that might have been previous to that, where existence can be eternal, where existence can actually be forever? And he was saying that there is, in all the things he ever said, if you look at his the texts that actually complete the story of the great teachers, they all alluded to it. It's not just Jesus Christ. You find that the Buddhist teacher, all the great Hindu sages or whatever, they all allude to a status of existence that is not the way we are now. Okay. And that's the great hope for us all, that somehow with a modus operandi that Andrew talks about, mind over matter, this power that we have, we may be able to re-access a situation where we are not trapped and get rotted as we all do within a physical reality like this, in this planet, this particular planet.
Okay, but could you go down the road as well that perhaps consciousness it comes into a body to have experience, to remember what it is, to get use the word experience again, that it couldn't do from the place it comes from?
Yeah, but consciousness is a backdrop into which information is written, and I believe that previous place to the Big Bang is consciousness itself, if you see what I mean. And at the Big Bang, if all things are together in one spot, then there have to be the opposite of that. So are fragmented and
if I could perhaps put something this way, what I would like to say is that if perhaps in the state that from which the physical universe emerged, there was a prior state of, if you like, in this universe everything is separate. Space and time are just words for separation, for things being apart and limited. Limit happens with separation. Now there may be another state of existence where everything exists together, where all potential exists, because after all, from that state of no thingness, of no matter, no space, no time, there was the potential for the whole universe to occur and the potential for us to become what we are now. But perhaps what we were before was something greater, because after all, we were all contained within that prior state of union, if it was all together, which means it would have been all-knowing, all at once. The only thing that we can learn here that we don't have there is we can become ignorant here. We're not becoming more knowledgeable. We're just becoming limited by our own restrictions.
We're becoming broken up all the time. The more we persist in a physical modus operandi. We're breaking up all the time. The brick is breaking up, and we don't know what brickness is anymore.
Okay, well, but if we were all if we in the spiritual state, we're all one, we're all knowing this, we're all everything, then there must be a greater purpose for consciousness to want to incarnate into a body.
Yes, absolutely, there might be, and you might have that choice too. All choices are open in complete freedom to be anything.
The problem is, if you have complete freedom, you also have the freedom to become restricted. And we may be in the tiny minority. We might be, the whole physical universe might be like a tiny little dot compared to all of existence. And we might just be those that have become limited through making mistakes or whatever, and so it may not be serving. If you look at all the suffering in the world, all the people starving, people in agony, and so on, there may not necessarily be a reason that those things are fulfilling some greater purpose. It might be because of wrong things that have happened, because of how we don't look after each other as a species, and so on, and the errors that we make.
Yeah. When you get limit, when you get broken upness, you get limit. And that's, I think, the ethos I've come to look at, really, as I never did before. You'll never do that if you join kind of religious dispositions, so you'll never see the nuts and bolts of it. So the moment you start to break, for instance, a piece of paper has all the information, one sheet of paper, you break that in half, it's more complex. And you get half the information in each sheet of you don't know what full sheet of paperness means, so to speak, if you just take that simple model. So what I'm trying to say is that at one point everything was together and all things were known, but that gives you the potential to be anything or nothing, and you can elect in free choice and free will what you want to be. But when you elect for limit, you actually elect.
Become limited.
You have a problem then, because you get stuck. And so you must know how to get back before that state if you don't want to sample that and get stuck. So the more stuck you are, you will then think from that stuckness kind of, it's compound interest type thing,
and perhaps this is why Jesus placed so much emphasis when he was asked what is the most important guidance of all. And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. if we have come from a state where we're all one, and that's a timeless state which still prevails, still exists now, then fundamentally at the ultimate level, our neighbor is ourself. We are all one. If we were to realize that, then we would not be so limited and restricted by the things that divide us, because arrogance, selfishness, racism, tribalism, nationalism, all these isms, all that they do is limit us and make us ignorant and keep us ignorant.
Yeah. And the fact you get more of that together, if you bring that whole thing apart and you know it all, in fact, even though you might have a choice to be anything, and that's the perfect, ethos of free will, if you like, why would you want to do that? The only thing you would want to do that for is to see what limit is from the point of view of limit, if you see what I'm trying to say. And to do that means risk. And if you do that with the power of mind to achieve that, well, you have to take what is commensurate with becoming that particular status. So you see, it really is a situation of what you've got to choose in your own terms of reference, and the smaller your particle becomes, your brick becomes, if you see what I mean, as you move along with the second law of thermodynamics, moving galaxies apart, moving everything apart as we stand, the less likely it is that we are able to know what a brick will be is all about. Jesus came to say how we do that, and how from a fraction we can become the whole, because he was the whole and the fraction at the same time in terms of what he was when this particular individual called Jesus. I don't want this to seem like some proselytizing zeal on behalf of a religion, but I'm looking at this chap as a model, this individual called Jesus as a model, whoever it might be, whoever the great teachers might be. And it's a funny thing, they all said the same thing. If you really look at the final basis on which all great teachings are based, it's based on this prevarication, this sense of being whole or part, and the choice to be such as that. And the more part you become, the harder it is to achieve the whole again. And we need teachers to show us how the piece of the brick connects up to the next piece of the brick and so forth, so we can then go back to seeing the whole story again, just in case we chose to be part, just for the sake of looking at the whole from the point of view of the part. So the choice might well prevail for anyone to be that too. True. There could also be just an incidental situation. If you've got a pole of complete altogether-ness, you would also then expect the opposite to prevail. Plus, there's a minus. Up, there's a down. And so the in-between state would be what? A Big Bang to me. And so I think when you've got two polarities completely opposed, the potential difference between both can cause a middle situation where the two are mixed together. And that's another way of trying to explain why physical universes exist and so forth. And so you see, you can't be sure, but here is a model that came to us 2,000 years ago with a thing called the Shroud 2,000 years later to say to us, little guys, listen, it's not all you think. I'm going to prove to you something that you may not believe for 2,000 years, and maybe 2,000 years later, when we have things like, science and all the rest of it, we might be able to show you this. I will be able to show you that what I'm saying and what I did is true.
Well, it would seem counter to everything that we can see from the technological side of things. Definitely remember that the image of the man on the shroud was formed from a dead body. So there's something to do with the property of what lives against what is synthetically manufactured. I don't know if we've got time to go into this in detail, but I've written papers on my website at lightoftheshroud.com if listeners want to look at it. But basically, you have to understand that the nature of matter and the connection between mind and matter to really sort of consider what might have been happening here. But in brief, I'll just say that that there was a physicist by the name of David Bohm who pointed out that matter is really frozen light, and light connects everything together in instantly within space and time, collapsing all separation into one point, so to speak, that time and space are united in singular terms, that there is no distance and no separation. And it appears that in some way the atoms of the body were to some extent unfrozen by what happened at the moment that the image of the man of the shroud was formed. And I don't think it could be just coincidence that the one time we know of that this has happened throughout history happens to be this particular individual, Jesus of Nazareth, who through his life taught about loving one's neighbor as oneself, and actually lived an example of doing that in practice. And I believe it's the power of what he did and how he lived that was actually instrumental in changing those atoms.
Yeah, and if you're still hearing me, Kevin, it really is the power to feel, to bring things together, this modus operandi of not separating things, which to me is hate, which puts people away, to divide us. It's bringing things together into points of union that he was really trying to say. And that's why I spoke in terms of a total contradiction of the Old Testament, which said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, break things up. He said, love thy neighbor as thyself, completely the opposite. So therefore, there seems to be pointing here two different ethoses, diametrically opposed to one another. And I believe that this man came here, Jesus had a property that whatever these technological, synthetic, manufactured entities were interested in. He had a soul that could best beat the second law most powerfully. And he's telling us that mind, thinking, feeling, acting in a modus operandi of bringing things together actually does break up force, atomicness, and leaves you in a situation of a field of result that sees all things in a unionized fashion. And that itself is how consciousness has its base, on that premise alone. And that consciousness was actually an analog of what was there before that first point of light burst as the universe. From the start, it came from a point so small, science tells us, to produce all we know and see in a physical reality terms of reference. Now, obviously, everything would have to be together at that point, would it not, logically speaking? So what I think Christ was saying was there's a universe beyond that, that all things are held together like that, in a permanence. But because that permanence is a statutory paradigm, there has to be the opposite too that exists. And if the two things mix, you've got then the chance to be all things. If you want to be separate, you will be separate. If you don't, you will be all together. But if you are separate, there's a price to pay. It's limit. And if there's limit, then you will never be together again, and you will be vulnerable to more and more expressions of decay and so forth. And I think this is a new way of seeing what religious teaching has been trying to tell from different levels, has been trying to tell us for centuries. The problem is that scoundrels take that over and use it for their own benefit. And then they say, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, we will not do this, you will not go to heaven, you will not go, whatever. And the same old ethos follows. Within religions, within tribes and so forth, we have different differentiations doing this. The Old Testament is full of references that could relate to robotic entities. Ezekiel saw a spaceship, a pillar of fire, for instance, a burning bush, for instance. And I think this is all technologically related to some kind of individualization because of technology to people who at that time were not technological, which seemed like a god, which seemed like gods. And I believe that the whole canard has been worked on our world now. If we don't realize this, our naturalness will go. And that's the only reason I've written these books, because it is something I just want to leave my children, rather than things that, as Andrew said, Jesus alluded to, moths can eat and rust can rot and so on. The God of Jesus was if you like, I don't like the word God, the paradigm of final togetherness, shall we say, of Jesus was the opposite of that of the Old Testament. That's the main point. It was the complete opposite of that. And that's why I look at a religious figure like a Jesus to try to explain that paradigm. I'm not saying I believe in Christianity or Buddhism or just in its own terms of reference. I'm simply saying they were roadways in which all of us can understand what's together against what is separate. And that basically is the simple ethos that I discovered. And I'll tell you what, I will not refer you to my website. The best website of all is the website that each individual can make in this discovery. I don't have the answers. I'm putting before people, choices really. Take a look, as I had to discover. And I found the most important thing of all. And that is that I don't have the answers, but the answers are there. And the only real answers that matter is the book that each individual writes, Kevin, in their own terms, as I had to do when my son asked me, Dad, are UFOs real? And I wanted to tell him it's all bunkum. And I discovered over 30 odd years, in still discovering to this day how wrong my skepticism or my cynicism at the time was. I have to admit that question prompted all of this when my son was 12 years old. And I have to say, it's been the most fascinating and interesting journey. And if you try it yourself, you've got to get rid of your prejudices. They'll be hitched up to your eyes. That's the hardest thing in the world, to be objective in all this. But if you're capable of doing that, you'll open a book that will absolutely blaze the property of your capacity as an individual as you've never known it. No matter what you feel about yourself, loser or winner or whatever, you'll make discoveries you never thought were possible. Just try it and see.
Well, Nigel Kerner and Dr. Andrew Silverman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you too, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
To find out more information on Nigel Kerner, just go to nigelkerner.com, or to find out more information on Dr. Andrew Silverman, just go to lightoftheshroud.com. Well, we've come to an end on today's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You can also go to themoreshow.co.uk for all news updates. So until next time, be safe.